Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining in on this very special video. Today I have a very special guest with me. Today we're going to be just introducing maybe a game that you've heard of before. Maybe this is the first time that you're hearing about it, but it's a game that I've been incredibly excited about playing. And today I have the creator of the video game itself. How about you introduce yourself and what this game is?
Yeah, sure thing. My name is Anders Lauritzen, and I am the creator of an upcoming game called Skald against the Black Priory, which is sort of a retro-style indie RPG. A game of grim, dark, Lovecraftian fantasy that has an aesthetic that kind of reminds you a little bit of like how role-playing games used to look 30 years ago. So it's kind of like an homage to a lot of like classic RPG titles, while also being actually a pretty modern RPG under the hood. So yeah, man, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. The game is launching in more or less exactly 7 days. So Thursday.
It's exciting, man.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. So I'm just out there banging the drum, trying to spread the good word, and talking to everyone who will listen.
I'm glad that you came on, man. So this game clearly is inspired visually from a lot of those Commodore 64 titles, games like Wizardry, Ultima, things of that nature. Did you grow up playing those types of games?
Yeah, those games and the Commodore 64 was kind of like when I was almost too young to be playing computer games. But I remember like seeing those games with like my friends' big brothers and their fathers and my father, you know, they would play those games. And then when I got a little bit older, I got really bad into CRPGs, computer RPGs, but it's almost strange to call them like the next generation because they were still pretty primitive, but they weren't necessarily Commodore 64 games. But nonetheless, the Commodore 64 era and those kinds of games have a hugely nostalgic spot, you know, in my sort of my childhood memories and stuff like that. So I really wanted to kind of try to recreate some of the magic that I think those games brought to PC gaming back in what we call the golden age of RPGs or role-playing games. Yeah, so that was kind of the feeling. And you know, like the elevator pitch for Skald is like, it's a game that looks the way we think games used to look 30 years ago when we think of it with our sort of rosy-colored nostalgia glasses on. But in reality, it looks nothing like a game used to look 30 years ago. It's much more sophisticated. But, you know, it's still like, for most people, if you kind of just like cold show them a picture of Skald, they'll say, oh, that's exactly what the Commodore 64 used to look like.
They might think they've already played the game or something.
Exactly. And I think like when we get that kind of response from people, I think that's exactly what we're trying to achieve, and I think I've done a good job of it, at least to some degree. It seems to be hitting a nerve with people.
I got to play more of it last night, and after I was playing it, I kind of got that itch to go back and play some CRPGs. I booted up Arena, the first Elder Scrolls game, and even with the Fallout TV show coming out and people playing older Fallout titles too, I was playing a little bit of Fallout 1 recently, and what you're saying about its whole feel and aesthetic to make it feel like one of those old school CRPGs, I feel like it's really effective what you've done there, while also in going straight from playing Skald to playing something like Arena, it's so very clear how much effort that you've put into making it feel like a modern game as well.
Exactly.
Are there some other modern RPGs or other video games maybe outside the RPG genre or outside of even the old school CRPGs that have kind of influenced you in creating this game?
I think a lot of the lineage of the game is honestly like there is more of modern RPGs than there is of retro RPGs in Skald. If I had reskinned Skald and it didn't have the 16 color aesthetic, if I had reskinned it to be a 3D game but everything else was the same, I don't think you would ever think that this is like a retro game. I think you would think that this is a game that is pretty similar to a game like Baldur's Gate 3 or the Pillars of Eternity game. Of course the scope is smaller because this is an indie game. It's not a studio of 600 people working on it. You know, there's a thing with some babies you don't want to throw out with the bathwater when it comes to game design, and then there are some babies you're very happy to throw out with the bathwater.
So just when I was playing too, and you can see in the trailers and everything, there's the dice roll mechanic, but outside of just things of that nature, there are tons of influences and rules that I think are coming straight out of even more classic RPGs, going all the way back to Dungeons and Dragons. Are you a big D&D fan? Do you play today?
Yeah. I was a huge D&D fan, or I've been a huge D&D fan since I was an adolescent. So and in many periods of my life, I've played a lot of D&D. I played a lot of D&D when I was in university. Still, we had like a really good group. We had a really good campaign that went on for years. Like the dream scenario, the one every D&D player dreams about. We had like, really stable group by the end, and then everyone moved away after university, and we ended up not really being able to play anymore, any of us. And I live pretty rurally, so it's I got kids and a day job and everything, so it's very difficult. So making Skald was actually a way of kind of processing the loss of that D&D group, or the loss of that hobby. So this is a direct extension of the campaigns we used to play. We played 3rd edition D&D, and there is a lot of 3rd edition D&D in the rules for this game, for instance. So it's a pretty direct, very strongly influenced this game, I would say. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's great that you bring all that up too. Even myself, I've got 2 kids of my own. I work 3 different jobs, as well as trying to do content on YouTube and all that sort of stuff. Getting the chance to interview guys like you is a great opportunity for me. But also outside of that too, even very recently, I tried putting together a group of friends to start one of those legendary D&D campaigns that will hopefully go on for a long time. But I just realistically don't know how that can happen nowadays. But I'll go more into my final review of the game. But so far, what I've played, it's already kind of felt like I've been sitting here playing a D&D campaign, going through Skald. And I think that you've done an excellent job, at least so far, of what I've played in capturing that feeling.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to hear it, because I would say that for me as a game developer, I would, in many ways, I think I'm more strongly influenced by tabletop RPGs than by digital RPGs. And also, this is the first game I've ever made. I'm not a professional game developer, really. Now I am because of this, but it's not like I've been working 30 years in the industry. So all of the lessons I had in game development came from being a dungeon master for 20 years, basically.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So it's cool that you can see that it's kind of shining through, because that was what I was trying to emulate, was kind of that feeling of actually playing in. I think that if you play Skald and if you played with me as a dungeon master, I think you would see where the influence came from. I think probably.
Yeah. I think even just in the demo for the game too, whenever you have those dialogue options, I feel like many of the dialogue options that you can choose for your character to make kind of feel like a wide range of dialogue options that whoever might be sitting at your table might do. You have the general kind of, okay, I agree with you, let's move forward and do this thing, all the way to the, I disagree with you and I want to kill you now. that kind of, you have those two ends of the spectrum kind of in many of the same dialogue trees. I think outside of just the gameplay side of things, where we've kind of talked a little about D&D mechanics, outside of just those video game and tabletop game influences, I've noticed that the writing and just the overall plot and the narrative and how it's all presented, particularly the writing, is really, really well done. And like I said, I'll go into this more when I do a full review. But what are some of your inspirations as far as writing? Because personally, I see things like this and I think like Chris Avalon with Planescape Torment, or Fallout 2, or Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Do any of these kind of games influence the way that you write these games?
Yeah, I was a huge fan of sort of the BioWare era of isometric RPG, so I really grew up on them. Those were the games like Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Fallout 1 and 2, Planescape Torment. Those were the streets I grew up on. That was my Commodore 64, quote unquote. Like that was so obviously that's influenced me quite a bit. But I think the more overarching issue is that I think that me and Chris Avalon have a lot of the same literary influences.
Nice.
Yeah, I think so. And I think especially in my writing is, and that's one of the things I wanted to bring to the game, because it's like a classic looking game, but I wanted a narrative that is more modern, and instead of having like a a more classical sort of heroic fantasy that was more typical in the early 90s. This is definitely, I would say, in sort of the more like a grim dark fantasy area, closer to something like Game of Thrones, for instance. And there's a lot of cosmic horror mixed in there as well. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't necessarily say I'm inspired by H.P. Lovecraft per se, but I think that whole genre of sort of fantastic fiction that was very popular when he was, from him and his contemporaries, I think shines through in a lot of the prose in the game. That's something I try to kind of actively have an authorial voice that is sort of reminiscent of that, a little bit of like bombastic, but still, there's a lot of sort of flowery descriptions and stuff like that, but still very grim and very dark and very sort of, if this game has some secret sauce, if there's like a secret weapon, I think it is the writing, because we get a lot of people saying that they think the writing is good. Another big influence of the game, which is very, very subtle in many ways, but it's there in a little bit, is also actually the TV show True Detective. The first season of True Detective is maybe one of the best pieces of certainly of sort of screen fiction ever made. I think it is spectacular.
I hear so many wonderful things about it, and I it's on my watch list. I still need to get to it.
There is nothing you should be watching before you have watched this. This is
okay.
The best TV ever made, I think, and some of the best media ever produced. It's spectacular, and that has kind of the same dark, gritty, nihilistic tone that was a huge influence on me when writing this game. It was kind of like I wanted to capture some of that same really, really like dark, nihilistic, existential dread that TV show has.
Yeah.
Not all the seasons, only the first season. The other seasons are crap. The first season is never made. Yeah.
So watch season 1. You can not watch. You can stop after 1. Just watch season 1.
You have to stop after season 1.
Okay. It's so crazy too that this game is coming out right now, because I just very recently got really into cosmic horror and Lovecraftian horror. I've been watching a couple of movies and have been listening to some of those old school H.P. Lovecraft stories, and just I've been very interested in this genre of fantasy, this genre of fiction, the painting of Dorian Gray and things like that too. Been going down that rabbit hole very recently, so it's been so cool. I didn't play the demo. I've only played the code of the game that I have right now. But it's very, very early on. You have the journal that you find from the astronomer, and without going into details about that, I think that was the first time that I realized what this game was really going for.
Oh, really?
As far as like its theme. Because I mean, it's very early on, but that particular journal entry, I was like, this is going to be a very mysterious game, and I am here for it.
Exactly. Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool. And I think it's one of those things that, yes, I would probably make a sequel of this game, but at some point I would like to make a game that is not cosmic horror, because I'm kind of like, I've learned a lot about how writing proper cosmic horror is very, very difficult. Because it is such a sort of less is more genre of writing. And the moment you explicitly kind of state something or explain something, then the mystery evaporates completely. And I think like the whole thing that makes cosmic horror work really well is this kind of sense of creeping dread. Kind of creeps in around you, and something being subtly wrong about the world around you is really by far the best way of doing it. That's really difficult to do, because you do need something for the players to kill, but the moment they kind of like kill some kind of like elder monster, then that creature stops being particularly interesting. So you have to kind of find other venues of injecting the horror, or sort of the sense that something is wrong in the game. I would say in many ways it's easier to write cosmic horror in a novel form than to do it in an interactive medium, and especially something like a role-playing game that is supposed to be a little bit of like a power fantasy. I've done as good a job as I could given the circumstances, I think. And then
I think you've done great, and I think even just with this channel that I run, I mean, we mostly talk about RPGs and JRPGs. I think back to the original PlayStation 1 release of Final Fantasy VII, where you have no idea what Sephiroth looks like, what what his nature is like, but you can see the destruction that he's caused. So all you have in your mind is, what's up with this guy? It's the same kind of concept with Friday the 13th. You want to see what's underneath the mask, but it's also you never want to see what's underneath the mask at the same time, because it keeps the mystery going.
There is like a sort of like a fallacy in a lot of modern games writing in particular, where we are terrified of people, like of not giving people the answers. We are far too willing as game writers, I think, to just stir people the answers. And I think definitely some of the most interesting fandoms, and especially when it comes to this kind of like fiction, is definitely this thing where like you can only see the contours of something, and then it's like, what the fuck is going on? I think like one of the best examples of cosmic horror in a movie is maybe the first Alien movie. And I think that one of the things that made the Alien franchise so mismanaged as it went, obviously the second movie is also really good, but it's a very good example of the more exposition you give about something, the less scary it becomes, the less interesting it becomes. Trying to kind of like explain something really makes it so much less interesting and scary.
Kind of moving away from what the game itself is regarding its gameplay or its story or its themes, I am interested kind of in hearing a bit more about what your personal journey has been as far as going from doing self-publishing to moving with a publisher like Raw Fury. Kind of how has that been for you, and how has Raw Fury been? Because I actually did, right before we started this interview, I listened to a podcast that you did with two representatives of Raw Fury, I guess about a year ago, and I thought that there was a lot of really interesting details about your time there. And even though that was a year ago, I guess now that it's been a year later since you've recorded that, how have things been? Like we've talked about, you're like, I don't know, a week or so away from releasing the game. Yeah. How's it all been, man?
It's been spectacular. There are two things that I always say to people, and when I talk about this, and one is that you shouldn't really look at my journey and try to emulate it, because I've been spectacularly lucky, I would say. And Raw Fury is... They are ranked as the best indie game publisher in the world, and I think on Metacritic, literally the second best publisher of any category in the world. They have very strong business ethics. They are an extremely strong ethical actor, and they are very sort of developer friendly. It changed my life to sign with Raw Fury. I was still working full time in a day job when I signed with Raw Fury, and I quit my job on the same day that I signed with them. It gave me the opportunity to become a professional game developer for years and years. So even if the game doesn't sell as well as we hope, and I have to kind of go back to working a day job, like these last 2.5 years have been at least professionally by far the best years of my life, and that's all thanks to Raw Fury, I would say. First of all, it's very difficult to get a publisher like Raw Fury. They sign something like 0.3% of the pitches they get. And the other thing that is also important to keep in mind, which I always sort of say when I talk to other game developers or would-be game developers, is that it's not a given that you need or should have a publisher. And even though I would say all publishers are probably acting from a place of they are really trying to kind of get good games made, but it's not a given that every publisher is a good fit for every developer, and you can really shoot yourself in the foot if you end up in kind of a bad relationship. You shouldn't look to people like me, because I've been exceptionally lucky. You should kind of try to get an idea of the entire spectrum of like, what does it mean to work with a publisher, both sort of the sunshine good cases, but also the ones where the developers come out of it and say, I probably don't ever want to do a publisher again, because both of those exist, I think, and I think that's important to understand. Yeah,
I think even in today's climate, where I think people are more aware of the indie scene than they have been in a very long time. I think we had a big peak of indie video games, and then people have kind of forgot about them. I think we're back at that moment where people are recognizing that this is where I think some of the most creative video games actually come from, especially whenever you look at situations like what happened with Microsoft and Xbox,
exactly.
And with Hi-Fi Rush and things like that. Do you personally feel like, since you have signed on with Raw Fury. Of course, there's the financial help that they provide, but there's also tons of other tools that they are able to provide to you as well. Do you feel like there's a reality where this game would have been out, a year ago, a year and a half ago, but would have been a half-baked mess or something, if it didn't come with some of that help from the publishers?
Yeah. I think that's exactly what would have happened. I don't think it would be a half-baked mess, but I think it would have been a very different game than what it is today. So there is no way I could have made the game that I have made today in the time I made it without Raw Fury's help. The question you should ask yourself whenever you consider signing with a publisher is whether or not collaborating with that publisher will be transformative for the project you're on. And I think you can safely say that it has been transformative for my game, at least.
Do you feel like now that you've gone through this process of going from just doing things solely on your own, and for the most part, at least from what I've been able to glean, most of the actual development process of the game is still just you. Do you have a desire to branch out and hire a team of people to make something bigger? No,
I don't think I will ever hire a big team. I think I have a very good workflow in working with subcontractors for certain things.
Nice.
I, for the most part, use subcontractors for things like art and music and sound effects and things like that, whilst I do all of the writing and coding and sort of the game design, level design myself. And I really enjoy that. So I think that if I had more people in the company, I would very quickly become a manager and not a game designer, and that's not really interesting to me. One of the kind of the long-term business goals, and also a little bit of part of the reason why making Skald has taken on and off 5 years, is that I've spent a long time developing sort of the technology pipeline to make this kind of game. Very specifically make this kind of game. And that means that I'm sort of trying to position myself to be able to make more of these games, and then hopefully not having to use 5 years to make the next game. Being able to spend time doing sort of the creative work and kind of the writing, literally, which is one of the things that I think that I can bring to the table that is better than many other developers can do. Like it's one of the, some people are artists, some other are musicians. I think I'm a writer at heart. This is a medium for me to kind of build this medium to this machine to be able to kind of express myself as like a game master for hundreds of thousands of people instead of 4 people.
Do you think there was a maybe a time where you thought, I don't know if I have this idea of a story that I want to tell, do I go the route of just writing a novel, or do I go the route of making a video game, or do I want to try to go into film or something I don't know what options have been presented to you, but what do you think was the big thing that made you think, this is what I want to do? I want to make a game. I want to tell this story, making it an interactive experience for a player.
It's kind of interesting because I don't have an IT background. I don't have a game development background. I have a completely different background. And I didn't even think about working on any of this until I was at least 25, I think. I think I was maybe 25 or 26 or 27 when I wrote my first line of code. So I taught myself to code, taught myself all of the tools I needed to make games. I've always been very fond of games, but I never thought that you could do it as a living. But then Minecraft came out at more or less the same time. So this is 10, 12 years ago when it was kind of like really big, and my daughters were playing it, and I was like, wow, one guy made this. And it kind of like made me started thinking. And then there was a movie called Indie Game the Movie, which is really
it's a great movie. Yeah, fantastic. I recommend everyone go check it out. Yeah.
They really should. They really should. It's really one of those pieces of film that kind of shows the pain that goes into making something, how deeply personal and intimate and painful this is. But I saw that movie and I was thinking, like, could it be possible? Is it even possible? Just started hacking away at it and started learning. I taught myself to program, really liked programming. I immediately regretted not going into software development as a career path. So for me, I think there was never a question of doing something other than either being a pen and paper game master or making computer games.
Well, right on, man. I think this has been a really cool conversation.
Sure.
I don't know, is there, before we end this discussion, is there any other kind of information about the game, or kind of about the process, or anything else that you didn't touch on that you feel like you'd like the audience to know, I guess, before the game comes out on May 30th, I believe, right?
Yeah, May 30th. Yeah, that's
30th.
right. That's right. No, I don't think so. I could literally talk for hours about any aspect of this. And so
I could too. That's kind of why I'm like, okay, we got to find a good spot to end it on a high note.
I really, like, it's a little bit self-serving, but I really hope people buy the shit out of this game because I want to continue making games. Tell your friends.
I have a review code for it, but I'm certainly going to be purchasing a copy of it myself, as well as any future console ports, if that's in the cards for this game. I'll definitely buy it on whatever it comes out on, man. I can tell that this is a labor of love, and not even just from a passion or a desire to recreate something like one of those old school CRPGs, but it just comes from someone who I can tell has a desire to just make good quality games, which I personally feel is kind of gone by the wayside in recent years for a lot of companies. So I appreciate what you've done, man. May 30th, everyone, you should absolutely, in his words, buy the shit out of Skald against the Black Priory. I guess that's it, man. Thank you for talking with me.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Yeah, you too.